While we were at the restaurant, my sister tapped her glass and announced, "Cheers to family. Except Wendy. She's just the adopted one." They all laughed. Then the waiter passed me a $3,270 check covering their whole dinner. I returned it and said, "Run my sister's card, it's under her name." She turned white. Then the manager walked over. The invitation showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered in person by my sister Claire. She hovered in the doorway of my downtown loft with that familiar smile I'd spent 28 years learning to interpret, the kind that never quite reached her eyes and always signaled that some barbed comment dressed up as concern was on its way. "Family dinner," she announced, waving a cream-colored envelope. "Dad's turning 60. I booked the private room at Carmichael's for Saturday night." Carmichael's, where a single plate costs more than most folks spend on groceries in an entire month. I studied Claire's expression, trying to spot the catch I was sure she'd hidden somewhere in this whole setup. "Why hand-deliver this?" I asked, leaning against the frame. "Because I wanted to make absolutely certain you'd come," she replied, her voice dripping with that syrupy false sweetness she'd perfected. "It just wouldn't be a proper celebration unless the whole family was there." She dropped the word family with exactly the weight she meant it to carry. After Dad married Miriam when I was 7 and Claire was 9, that word had become a weapon in their house. Miriam never let me forget I wasn't her biological daughter, and Claire had picked up her mother's knack for quiet, cutting cruelty. Still, I accepted the invitation. A part of me, the part that remembered Dad reading bedtime stories before Miriam appeared in our world, hoped this dinner might turn out differently. Saturday came with an odd October warmth for Chicago. I got ready carefully, choosing a navy silk blouse and tailored pants that made me look confident without seeming like I was trying too hard. The reflection staring back at me looked steady and capable. Nothing like the unsure girl who used to cry in her childhood bedroom while Claire and Miriam laughed downstairs. My friend and my coworkers gathered on the ground floor of a converted warehouse in River North. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs designed to make wealthy diners feel daring, while they spent ridiculous amounts on deconstructed dishes. The hostess led me from the main room to a private space in the back where my family had already assembled. Dad, Harold, stood by the bar, his silver hair perfectly styled, cradling what I immediately recognized as his preferred bourbon. Miriam perched on a velvet seat, her designer dress undoubtedly costing more than my rent. Claire held court as usual, surrounded by her husband Aaron and their 2 kids, along with Miriam's sister Linda and her family. "Jenna," Dad said when he spotted me, his face lighting up in a way that felt genuinely warm. He crossed the room and hugged me, reminding me why I still showed up for these performances. "You look wonderful, sweetheart." "Happy birthday, Dad," I told him, handing over the gift I'd found, a first edition of his favorite Hemingway novel I'd hunted down through a rare book dealer. His eyes actually misted as he studied it. "This must have cost you." "Don't worry about it," I said, squeezing his arm. "You're worth it." Miriam materialized beside us, her perfume always arriving before she did. "How thoughtful," she said, managing to make the word sound like anything but a compliment. "I booked your father a week at that exclusive golf resort in Scotland, but books are nice too." The comparison dropped between us like spoiled meat. Claire smirked from across the room, clearly pleased with the little moment she'd engineered without lifting a finger. "I love it," Dad said firmly, tucking the book under his arm. "This is incredibly special, Jenna." We settled around the table as servers handed out leather-bound menus. I ended up between Linda's husband Frank and Claire's older son Ethan, positioned just far enough from everyone else to guarantee I'd be left out of any real conversation. Naturally, Claire had chosen the seating. The prices on the menu made me blink. Appetizers started at $45, entrees soared past $80, and the wine list read like a mortgage statement. "Order whatever you want," Claire announced generously, waving an arm around the table. "Tonight we're celebrating properly." I kept it simple, a salad and the least expensive fish, while the rest ordered lobster, Wagyu beef, and wine bottles that probably matched my car payment. Claire chose the chef's tasting menu with wine pairings, Aaron asked for a 40-year-old scotch, and Miriam insisted on the imported caviar service for the table. The night played out the same way these gatherings always did. Miriam dominated the conversation with stories designed to spotlight Claire's achievements. Her promotion to senior vice president, her kids getting into elite private schools, her recent feature in Chicago Business Magazine. Of course, not everyone defines success the same way, Miriam added, letting her eyes drift toward me. Jenna's chosen a more modest path with her graphic design work. Very creative. She said creative like she meant hobby, not career. Never mind that I'd built a solid freelance business with clients all over the country. Actually, I just signed a contract with, I began. Oh, how lovely. Claire cut in before I could finish. It's so important to have little projects that bring joy. Speaking of which, Mom, did you see the spread about our house in modern luxury? I leaned back, feeling that old sting of being brushed aside wash over me like cold water. This was the script every time. Any attempt I made to share something meaningful got flattened by Claire's perfectly timed interruptions or Miriam's polite dismissal. Dad caught my eye from down the table and offered an apologetic shrug, but he didn't step in. He never did step in. Aaron launched into a detailed account of their recent kitchen renovation, bragging about imported Italian marble and custom cabinetry that cost more than some folks make in a year. Linda jumped in with enthusiastic questions, filling her usual role as the supportive aunt, while Frank nodded politely, though I noticed his eyes flicking to his phone every few minutes. The servers brought the next course, a foamy creation that looked more like a chemistry project than dinner. Claire photographed hers from 3 angles before taking a bite, clearly gathering content for her perfectly curated social media feed. Her Instagram painted a picture of a flawless life. Stunning home, thriving career, photogenic kids, a doting husband. The truth was far less polished. I knew Aaron's real estate deals had taken a hit recently, and Claire was quietly drowning under the expectations that came with her promotion, but their facade never cracked. Sit up straight, sweetheart, Claire murmured to Ethan without glancing away from her screen. The kid adjusted instantly, clearly trained in the family art of public presentation, while Noah stayed absorbed in his game, headphones blocking out the adult chatter. Miriam launched into a rundown of the charity gala she was organizing, a fundraiser for some arts foundation where she served on the board. She relayed each detail meticulously. The venue, the guest list, the auction items they'd secured. We're expecting over 300 attendees, she said proudly. The governor confirmed, and Claire's handling all the corporate sponsorships through her firm. Quite an undertaking, Dad offered, dutifully playing his part as supportive husband. Well, someone has to uphold cultural standards in this city, Miriam replied, sounding like she bore this responsibility single-handedly. Though I do wish we had more family support for efforts like these. Linda and Frank, you'll be there. Naturally, wouldn't miss it, Linda replied quickly. Miriam's eyes drifted toward me, lingering just long enough to make her meaning obvious. I hadn't been invited to help with the gala. Apparently my skills weren't suited for Miriam's rarefied social sphere. The wine kept pouring. Claire ordered a second bottle of something French and pricey, waving off the server's attempt to show her the label. Aaron dominated the table with a story about a demanding client trying to bail on a commercial property deal. 15 minutes of excruciating detail, while the rest of us pretended to be invested. I let my gaze drift around the room to stay sane. The exposed brick had been coated with some glossy sealant that made it look strangely artificial, and the Edison bulbs dangling from black cords cast dramatic shadows across the pressed tin ceiling. The whole place was designed to look rugged and authentic, though it cost a fortune. Much like everyone gathered here. How's your fish, Jenna? Dad asked gently, trying once again to draw me in. It's great, I said honestly. The chef really knew what he was doing, even if the whole portion could fit in my hand. Very well executed. I'm sure it's adequate, Miriam added, making it sound like ordering the least expensive option was some kind of moral failing. Aaron ordered Wagyu tonight, and it's supposed to be out of this world. Imported from Japan. The cattle get a special diet and daily massages. I didn't realize cows needed spa appointments, I said dryly. Aaron chuckled, missing the sarcasm entirely. The marbling is incredible. Here, try a bite. He cut a piece and extended his fork across the table toward me. I'm good, thanks, I said, avoiding the need to accept anything from them I hadn't chosen myself. Claire was back on her phone, barely touching the courses from her tasting menu. Each dish arrived with a polished explanation from the server, and Claire would nod absently, take a bite or two, then push it aside. The waste was staggering, but no one batted an eye. Ethan asked to go to the bathroom, and Claire waved him off without looking up. He slipped into the main restaurant while Noah kept playing, completely absorbed. I wondered what their world felt like. Growing up surrounded by people who valued image over connection. At least they had each other. So, Jenna, Linda said, turning to me with what seemed like genuine interest, are you seeing anyone special these days? The question hit the table like a thrown match. Suddenly everyone's attention snapped my way, expectant and evaluating. I could practically sense the silent verdict forming. Poor Jenna, pushing 30 and still unattached. Surely something must be off. I'm dating casually, I said lightly. Nothing serious right now. Probably for the best, Miriam replied with that sticky, condescending sympathy she'd mastered. You're so absorbed in your little business. A real relationship takes time and energy. The meaning was clear. In her eyes, I was too busy with my supposedly small career to attract or sustain anything meaningful. Never mind that I'd ended my last serious relationship after realizing he needed me to shrink to fit his ego. I'd learned better and wasn't going backward. Claire met Aaron at a charity function, Miriam added, sliding gracefully into matchmaking mode. Maybe you should attend more social events, Jenna. You can't meet quality people if you're always tucked away in your apartment working. It's a loft, I corrected gently, and I meet plenty of people through my work. Of course you do, Claire said at last, lifting her eyes from her phone. Her smile had an edge to it, sharp enough to feel from across the table. Though I imagine most of the folks you meet are other freelancers, not exactly the same social caliber as corporate events, she said, and the judgment in her tone made my jaw tighten, as if a person's worth could somehow be calculated by their job title or the formality of the room where you happen to meet them. I'd gone out with a lawyer once, a man who checked every box on Miriam and Claire's invisible list of acceptable partners. He'd been dull, patronizing, and entirely convinced that his profession made him inherently more significant than mine. When I ended things, Claire called me ridiculous for letting such a catch slip away. Frank cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. He'd barely spoken all night, and I suspected he found these family gatherings just as draining as I did. Linda had married him for his family's old money and social connections, but the man himself always seemed worn out by the constant performance his wife and her relatives demanded. The servers whisked away our dinner plates and handed out dessert menus. Yet another lineup of overpriced options, each sweet costing what any normal person would spend on an entire meal. Claire ordered the chocolate soufflé that required 20 minutes to prepare. Miriam chose a deconstructed tiramisu. Aaron requested a cheese course with a glass of port. I declined dessert, which earned me a look of open disapproval from Miriam, as though skipping a $40 finale was just another example of me falling short of their standards. While the table waited, Claire launched into a story about Ethan's latest academic triumph. He'd scored in the 98th percentile on some standardized test. Everyone chimed in with congratulations, praising Claire's parenting and Ethan's unmistakable brilliance. Noah, though physically present, stayed absorbed in his game, ignored by everyone. We've always prioritized education in our family, Miriam said pointedly. Of course, children have different strengths. Some excel academically while others are more artistic. Her gaze locked on me again. The irony was almost funny. I'd been a top student, earned scholarships, graduated near the top of my class. But Miriam had never acknowledged any accomplishments that weren't Claire's, always finding a way to frame mine as second-rate. Dad shifted in his seat, discomfort written all over him, but as usual, he didn't act on it. I'd spent years making excuses for him, telling myself he was caught between Miriam and me, doing his best. But watching him sit silently beside his wife's constant needling, I felt that old excuse starting to crumble. Desserts arrived with over-the-top presentation. Claire's soufflé came out with grand explanation from the server. Miriam's tiramisu was spread across a slate board in carefully separated components, and Aaron's cheese assortment came with detailed notes about region and flavor. I drank my water and watched everyone perform their wealth like a script they'd rehearsed. These people shared my last name and my father, but they lived in a world where status meant everything. I lived in a world where meaning came from honesty and real connection. We were never going to speak the same language. Their voices washed around me as though I were behind glass. Linda's family discussed an upcoming Maldives vacation. Aaron laid out the details of his latest property acquisition. Ethan and Noah tapped away on their tablets, ignored except when servers dropped off their children's entrees that probably cost $70 each. Dad tried again and again to pull me into the conversation, asking about my recent work projects or my hiking trip in Colorado. But Miriam and Claire redirected every thread with the precision of trained handlers guiding a flock. More dishes arrived, each more decorative than substantial. My small fish came with 3 asparagus spears, and a streak of sauce that probably took an entire culinary team to perfect. Everyone else indulged in courses worth hundreds of dollars each, punctuating bites with talk of investment portfolios and luxury vacations. I ate slowly, mentally tallying the bill, growing with every expensive bottle of wine and specialty course. The caviar service alone had to be at least $400. Claire's tasting menu ran $350 per person. Aaron's scotch, $90 an ounce. He'd ordered 3 of those. Midway through the evening, Claire tapped her wine glass with her knife. The crystal chimes sliced through the room, pulling every eye to her. "I'd like to propose a toast," she said, rising with her glass held high. Her smile radiated that glossy perfection she showcased online, the kind of smile that convinced strangers she lived some fairy tale life. To family, to the bonds that carry us through thick and thin. Everyone lifted their glasses, even Ethan and Noah with their overpriced sodas. To the people who share our blood and our history, she continued warmly. To the connections that truly matter. Her gaze drifted slowly across the table, then locked onto me with pinpoint precision. Everyone here represents those sacred family ties. Then her smile curled into something vicious. "Well, everyone except Jenna. She's just the adopted one." The room detonated with silence, and then Aaron let out a chuckle. Linda slapped a hand over her mouth but failed to hide her smirk. Miriam laughed openly, not even bothering to dress it up. Dad's face went red, but once again, he said nothing, and somehow that silence cut deeper than Claire's cruelty. Ethan and Noah looked bewildered, glancing around as if trying to understand the joke. Frank shifted awkwardly beside me, but most of the table either laughed or fought the urge to, treating Claire's comment not as the calculated humiliation it was, but as some harmless little zinger. Claire stayed on her feet, her glass still lifted, soaking in the moment like she'd been waiting for it all night. "To family," she said again, stretching the word and staring straight at me. Something inside my chest snapped into perfect, silent clarity. 28 years of moments just like this flickered through my mind, one after another, like someone running a reel too fast. Every snide remark, every event I was accidentally left out of. Every time Claire used the fact that she shared DNA with Dad as a weapon while I was expected to swallow it and smile. I remember being 12 and overhearing Miriam tell Claire that blood was thicker than water, that real family couldn't be disrupted by something as insignificant as adoption papers. I remembered 16, when Claire deliberately left me out of her Sweet 16 planning and told our classmates I wasn't really her sister. I remembered college graduation, when Miriam stood there telling everyone how proud she was of her daughter while looking only at Claire, even though we'd both graduated that month. I remembered every Christmas when Claire unwrapped extravagant gifts while mine were practical, forgettable things. Every birthday when she got a lavish party and Miriam could barely recall the date of mine. Every accomplishment I'd fought to earn, brushed aside while Claire's smallest successes were treated like breakthroughs worthy of headlines. And I remembered Dad's excuses. I remembered them all. Miriam's adjusting. Claire is going through a phase. Try to understand. It's complicated. Just give it time. Years of him asking me to make myself smaller, quieter, more patient. Years of him choosing comfort over courage. Years of the man who'd promised to protect me deciding that peace was easier than defending the daughter he chose. The anger that rose in me wasn't fiery. It was cold, steady, and absolutely sure. I was finished. Finished pretending cruelty was the cost of belonging. Finished shrinking myself to squeeze into a family that never left space for me. Finished convincing myself that their treatment was somehow my responsibility to fix. I didn't stand up or shout or cry or give Claire the big reaction she craved. Instead, I set down my fork carefully and took a slow sip of water. The server stepped up beside me right then, perfectly timed, holding a leather portfolio I recognized immediately. The check. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "I have the final bill for your party." He held it out toward me. The table hushed again, eyes locked on us with thinly veiled interest. I could feel Claire's satisfaction radiating like heat. One final humiliation, where I'd be expected to stammer my way out of paying for a dinner I could never afford. I opened the portfolio. The total punched me in the gut. $3,270. More than $3,000 for dinner with people who had just laughed at Claire calling me not really part of the family. I stared at the number doing the math. My salad and fish came to maybe $80 total. The rest? Lobster, Wagyu, caviar, scotch. Items ordered by people who treated me like an afterthought. There's been a mistake, I said evenly, closing the portfolio and handing it back. His smile wavered. I'm sorry, miss, was something incorrect? The charges appear correct, I said. But you handed this to the wrong person. I slid the portfolio down the table toward Claire with absolute precision. It glided across the white tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of her, breaking whatever glow she'd been basking in. Claire made the reservation under her name, I said, my voice clear and solid. She chose this restaurant, invited everyone, and told us to order whatever we wanted. I'm sure she'll be happy to take care of the bill for her own event. Claire's face shifted so fast it was almost cinematic. The smugness vanished, replaced by raw, stunned panic. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. That's she finally managed. You can't possibly what? I asked, still calm. Expect you to pay for the dinner party you organized? That seems like the most reasonable thing in the world. This was Dad's birthday. She squeaked, her voice jumping. Someone has to cover it. Then cover it, I said smoothly. You're a senior vice president now, at least that's what Miriam spent the night reminding everyone. I'm sure this bill is nothing to you. Aaron leaned in toward her, whispering urgently. Miriam's face tightened, wheels turning fast. Linda and Frank exchanged knowing glances. Dad looked between us, confusion giving way to something like understanding. I don't have, Claire started, then cut herself off, unwilling to admit she didn't have the money after bragging all night. The server froze, still standing between us, wishing more than anything he were somewhere else. Perhaps we could split it, Miriam suggested tightly. Everyone can contribute their portion. Excellent idea, I said with cheerful clarity. My portion is $83 for the salad and fish, plus a fair share of the water and bread. I'll gladly cover that. The remaining $3,187 belongs to the rest of you. I took out my wallet and placed 5 crisp 20s on the table, with a generous tip for my part. Then I stood, smoothing my blouse, feeling an unexpected steadiness settle over me. Although, I added lightly, I am just the adopted one, not real family according to Claire, so maybe I shouldn't be contributing anything at all. I'd hate to overstep. Claire's face cycled from fury to embarrassment to genuine panic. Her hand twitched toward her purse, then stalled. Aaron whispered fiercely, trying to coach her through the moment. I could practically see the equation shifting behind her eyes as she struggled to save face. Claire was still frozen with her glass raised when the private room door swung open and a man in a manager's suit stepped inside, clearly summoned by our poor server who wanted nothing to do with the chaos unraveling at our table. The man looked mid-40s, hair styled like he'd spent years perfecting it, and carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to untangling wealthy diners' messes. Good evening, he said smoothly. I'm Jeremy Lawson, the general manager. I understand there may be some confusion regarding tonight's bill. No confusion at all, I replied before Claire could find her voice. Claire Clark made the reservation, hosted the event, and invited every guest. The bill belongs with her. Jeremy turned his gaze toward Claire, taking in her wide-eyed panic. Miss Clark, our records show the reservation under your name, and your confirmation indicated you would be handling payment for the party. The color drained right out of her face. It dawned on her, probably for the first time, that she'd clicked through the reservation steps without reading a single line. I didn't, Claire began, but her words tangled into a stutter. When you booked our private dining room, Jeremy continued in that same polished tone, you confirmed via email that you would provide payment at the end of the evening. We sent 3 separate confirmations, including an estimated cost based on the number of guests you listed. Surely there's been a misunderstanding, Miriam cut in sharply. My daughter would never agree to cover an entire dinner. I can show you the emails, Jeremy said, pulling a tablet from his portfolio. Sent to Clark at Harrison Financial. Com. The confirmation states plainly that the host assumes responsibility for all charges during the event. Aaron went pale, clearly calculating their finances. Claire looked between her mother and her husband like a trapped animal trying to find any possible escape. This is absurd, Miriam snapped. Obviously this was meant to be divided. Actually, Dad's voice slid through the tension, quiet but firm. Every head turned toward him. He'd stood from his seat, and for once, his expression carried real hardness. The man who normally surrendered every dispute to Miriam and Claire had reached his limit. Claire organized this dinner, he said. She chose this overpriced restaurant, encouraged everyone to order freely, and never mentioned splitting a thing. If she booked it and agreed to cover it, then that's her responsibility. Robert. Miriam gasped, horrified. You cannot possibly expect your daughter to. My daughter just announced that Jenna isn't real family, Dad said, his voice gathering steel. She humiliated her sister in front of everyone. Maybe it's time Claire learned that actions have consequences. The room fell stone silent except for the faint background music. Ethan and Noah stared at their screens like wishing themselves invisible. Linda and Frank kept their eyes glued to the tablecloth. Claire's eyes glittered with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Those tears had nothing to do with remorse. They were born from exposure. I don't have $3,000 in my checking account, Claire whispered finally. The system must have glitched. I never meant to pay for everyone's meals. Then perhaps Jeremy offered diplomatically we can arrange a payment plan. Carmichael's is always happy to. No need, I said, cutting him off. Every head turned toward me in disbelief. Even Miriam's mouth fell open. Dad started to protest, but I'd already pulled out my credit card, my business card, the one I use for major costs. Jenna, you don't have to, Dad said softly. I know, I replied. But I'm doing it anyway. Jeremy accepted the card gracefully and stepped away to process it. When he returned to the server station, I turned back to the table, standing tall. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cool and steady. I'm paying this bill because I can. Not because anyone here deserves it. And I want every single one of you to remember this moment. I let my gaze fall on each of them. Remember that the adopted daughter, the one Claire says isn't real family, just saved all of you from a humiliating scene. Remember that the person you've treated as lesser for years is doing a whole lot better than you ever bothered to notice. Claire flinched as though I'd slapped her. Those little projects Eleanor talked about? I went on. My business made $400,000 in revenue last year. I own my loft outright. No mortgage. I have savings stacked higher than most annual salaries. Not that I've ever felt the need to brag about it. I don't measure my worth by stepping on people to feel taller. Miriam looked like she'd turned to stone. Linda stared at me with a new, assessing sharpness. Aaron seemed ready to slide under the table. Claire, you wanted everyone to know I'm adopted, I said, finally facing her fully. Fine. I am. Dad chose me. He picked me out of every kid he could have lifted up. He brought me into his life because he wanted me, not because biology tied his hands. Dad's eyes were wet, one hand covering his mouth as he listened. You, I told Claire quietly, were born into this family. You had no choice in how you came into this family, but I was chosen. And right now I'm choosing to walk away from people who think bloodlines matter more than the way we treat one another. Jeremy returned with my card and the receipt, and I signed it quickly, adding a 30% tip for the server who'd endured this circus with saint-like patience. Dad, I said, turning toward him, I love you. Happy birthday. But I won't be showing up for any more family events where I'm treated like this. If you want a relationship with me, it'll have to be just the two of us from now on. He nodded slowly, the mix of regret and comprehension shifting across his face like he'd finally allowed himself to see something he'd ignored for too long. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have stopped this years ago. Yeah, I said gently. You should have. I grabbed my coat from the rack by the door. Behind me, the private room stayed silent except for the sound of Tyler whispering to his mom, asking if they were poor now. Walking through Carmichael's main dining room toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in years. $3,000 was a big hit, sure, but the relief of finally telling the truth, my truth, was worth every penny. Before I even reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Dad. Can we have lunch next week? Just us. I have a lot I want to apologize for. I smiled at the screen, feeling the last knot in my chest loosen. A second message arrived right away. Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm sorry I let you forget how much she loved you. My birth mother, the one who died when I was 5, leaving Dad to raise me alone until someone like Miriam came along. Tears prickled my eyes, but they felt cleansing, not heavy. I texted back. Lunch sounds good. And Dad, thank you for standing up for me tonight. The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, reappeared. Thank you for standing up for yourself, he wrote. I'm ashamed it took me this long to follow your lead. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Claire. I deleted her message without opening it. Whatever excuse or accusation she'd crafted wasn't mine to hold anymore. The November air bit at my face as I walked to the car, but Chicago's skyline looked stunning against the dark sky, sparkling like nothing had gone wrong at all. I imagined my family still huddled in that private room, trying to figure out how to explain the disaster to their friends. I wondered whether Claire would tell people her adopted sister humiliated her at Dad's birthday dinner. She'd probably twist it somehow, cast herself as the victim. But the witnesses, the people who'd heard her cruelty firsthand, would know exactly how it really went. As I started the car, the phone rang again. Dad. Hey, I answered. I just wanted you to know, he said, voice thick with emotion, that Miriam and I are going to have a real conversation tonight. The way she's treated you. The way I've allowed it. That ends now. Dad, I'm not asking you to choose between. I'm not choosing, he cut in firm and steady. I'm fixing something I should have fixed years ago. You're my daughter. My first daughter. And I've failed you by not making that clear from the start. A warm, healing ache filled my chest. I appreciate that, I said. The book you gave me, he continued. Remember what Hemingway said about courage? Courage is grace under pressure, I quoted automatically. You showed more courage tonight than I've shown in a decade, he said quietly. I'm sorry it took you being publicly humiliated for me to finally grow a backbone. We talked for 20 more minutes, each of us sitting alone in our cars in the parking lot, finally having the honest conversation that should have happened long ago. He admitted he'd convinced himself that keeping peace with Miriam was worth the little compromises, never realizing those small sacrifices had stacked up into a betrayal of the daughter he'd chosen. When we hung up, I drove home through Chicago's late-night traffic, past the lake where the water mirrored the streetlights like scattered jewels. My loft waited, calm and fully mine, paid for with money I'd earned myself. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 32 messages. Claire, Miriam, even Aaron, some demanding, some justifying, some apologizing, all tangled together. Patricia had sent a long rant about how I'd embarrassed Claire and damaged her reputation. And somehow Tyler had gotten my number, sending a confused little message asking why everyone was mad at each other. I blocked Claire and Miriam, ignored Patricia, and sent Tyler a gentle note explaining that adults sometimes disagree and none of it was his fault. Later that day, Dad's lunch invitation arrived by email, formal, thoughtful, suggesting a tiny Italian place we'd loved when I was a teenager. Just the two of us. No Miriam, no Claire. A fresh start. 2 weeks later, Dad filed for legal separation. He called me himself, saying he'd spent too long letting Miriam poison what could have been a blended family worth having. The divorce would be messy and pricey, but he sounded more alive than I'd heard him in years. Your mother, your first mother, Sarah. She would have shut all this down immediately, he said. I dishonored her memory by letting Miriam turn our home into a battleground. Months passed before Claire sent one final email. She'd gotten into therapy, she said, working through what she called her family dysfunction patterns. Her message sounded surprisingly sincere. She admitted she'd used me as a target for her insecurity, always afraid she'd never measure up to Miriam's impossible expectations. These days, Dad and I grab lunch twice a month. We talk about everything except Miriam and Claire, building a real relationship, one made of respect instead of obligation. He asks about my childhood, really asks, really listens, for the first time since Miriam came into our lives. Last week, over bowls of pasta carbonara at our usual spot, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $3,170. I can't take this, I said immediately. Consider it a very late birthday gift, he replied. For all the birthdays I ignored because I was too busy keeping Miriam satisfied. Kept it. Used it to book a trip to Scotland, ironically, the same place Claire had sent him for his birthday. But I wasn't trying to compete anymore. I was simply living my life, without begging for affection from people who'd never planned to offer it. The Carmichael dinner became something of a legend among Dad's friends. He didn't lie about what happened or try to protect Miriam's image. When people asked about the divorce, he told them the truth. He finally realized he'd been enabling cruelty toward his daughter and decided enough was enough. Sometimes I think about Claire's toast, That moment she stood there, wine glass raised, declaring I wasn't truly family. I think about the laughter, the cheap cruelty of people who thought humiliation was entertainment. And then I think about what followed. Sliding that bill across the table. The way her face collapsed when she realized her own trap had sprung back on her. Finding my voice after years of shrinking myself. My adoption papers hang framed in my office now, right above my work table where I design projects for clients who pay very well for my supposedly little creative hobby. Dad gave the framed papers to me on my birthday, along with a note written in his precise, almost old-fashioned handwriting. You were chosen. That has always meant more than biology ever could. I'm sorry I forgot that. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. Claire can keep her obsession with bloodlines. I'll take being chosen any day.